Are you sick of sending cold emails that do not get any reply? Well, on this episode, you're going to learn how to send emails that get people's attention and have people coming to you, proactively coming to you for more insights and information. Hello, Sales Nation, and welcome to today's episode of the Salesman podcast. On today's show, we have Sujan Patel. You can find out more about him over at sujanpatel.com. He is a world-leading marketing expert. On today's show, we're diving into cold emails, how you can get them delivered, because if you do certain things with certain words, certain titles, even certain phrases, they will not even be delivered to your prospect's inbox, how you can get attention with them, and how you can write emails that people want to respond to. That is the crux, that is the key to all of this. And so with all that said, let's jump in to today's episode. Sujan, welcome to the Salesman podcast.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Super pumped to talk to you.
You're more than welcome, sir. I'm glad to have you on. I'm glad to have we have the red team in sales and perhaps a blue team in marketing, and we should be working together more often than not, but we, typically in the corporate environment, that doesn't happen as often as we like to. So I like to have marketers on occasionally to dive into what you're doing, which works incredibly well, and how perhaps we can leverage some of that. And even better, if we can have a conversation and wrap up the conversation with anything that we should be kind of push onto marketing rather than doing in sales. And we're going to dive into cold email outreach. It might go into deeper and deeper into what is cold email and how we can warm it up and things like that. But before we get into anything, is cold email outreach on the part of a sales professional, is that a good tactic to get attention right here in the middle of 2017?
Absolutely. It's an oldie, but it still works. I think it's one of the more effective channels, especially if you're just starting off, or even if you're launching a new product, or you want to increase bottom line. It's a way. It's something you can turn on and off in a short period of time. So it's absolutely, but at the same time, it's also a great way to annoy the hell out of everybody. If you do it wrong, or just too aggressive, or you really don't know what's gonna make the person on the other end tick. But really, if you don't provide value, it becomes spam. If you're providing value or something interesting, and that's dependent on the receiver, then that's good marketing.
I think you just, I'm writing it down so I don't gloss over it. You teed up something here, which I think is really important, in that there's a perspective on this. It's perceived value from the recipient's end versus what you think is valuable, right? So how do we uncover before we send the email, before we engage, before we have a conversation, how do we know what is going to be likely valuable for the person that we're emailing?
Yeah, so this is where I think you have to spend a lot of time looking through your list of people. Let's just say you've made a list of people you want to contact. You've got emails ready to go and whatnot. I think a lot of, at least what I've seen, a lot of people just I'm going to do a spray and pray, or I'm going to massively email thousands of people. Well, I urge people, one, to simply scrub through that email list with an intern, yourself, whatever, and just see, who do you know? Who do you actually have a connection with? Engage with them on social media. So the first and foremost thing is it's only a cold email if this is your first contact, or if this is their first time seeing you. So by simply viewing their profile on LinkedIn, or even following them on social, or engaging with whatever they have as far as assets, whether it's again, LinkedIn posts, you can comment, a blog post, even better, but just get on their radar somehow. And do that before you reach out. So now it's not necessarily as cold of an email. But the other thing is looking at what makes them tick, or what's something you can provide them as value. So that's really hard to do on a large scale. So I like to bucket into things like couple categories. So let's say I'm reaching out to a bunch of CEOs. One, maybe I categorize it based off the size of the company they manage, maybe the industry they manage. And that will determine maybe the article I send them, or the angle I approach. So again, just making it a little bit more specific to that person, it is going to be very, very powerful.
So I think there's two islands here. There's one of an email list that people have subscribed to. They know that it's broadcast content that's going out to thousands of people, if not hundreds of thousands of people. Then you've got the other side, which is the completely bespoke email that takes long time to write. You hope that you get a response from it because you've invested so much into it. And you've broken down a really nice middle ground here of perhaps batching people together. So perhaps a marketer would batch, personas of thousands of people, hundreds of people, whereas salespeople might do 5 or 6 people, in that you could even do it account-based. Or if you wanted to send a cold email to an account, you could have one piece of content, one insight within that email perhaps that's useful for the whole account. And then when you go to the next account, because that might go to CEO, CFO, an end user, middle management, and you've kind of saved a crap ton of time by grouping this together in a group of 5 or 6 versus sending each one an individual. So I like this. It seems like there's a middle ground here between the usual conversations that I have on the show are, it must be bespoke. Every email, you're wasting your time. People aren't going to respond. People are overworked. And then on the other side, you have this spray and pray approach, which is essentially a cold calling approach of just make as many dials or send as many emails as you can. So I like this middle ground. And something else here that was useful that came to mind when you said that was when you warm people up on social. Is there a process to doing that? Because I'll tell you my thoughts on it in a second and my experience with it right now in 2017. But do you have a process to warm people up so that they know who you are when they get that email?
I use Clearbit Reveal, Clearbit API, to essentially enrich my data. And then anything else, if I don't find them, I'll essentially have the person who's scrubbing the list, who's in charge of kind of making sure the list is quality, which is generally like a sales intern, a BDR, SDR, or on my end, it's mostly like marketing interns because I'm more of a marketer than a salesperson. And that person's kind of filling up all the profiles. It's really just engaging with them a few days kind of beforehand. And my process is simple. Find them on Twitter, view their profile on LinkedIn, and I don't even add them. I just view their profile. If they have a blog, if I've identified the blog, if I haven't, just skip that process. If I've identified the blog, I'm essentially going to put in that spreadsheet I have the blog post that best resonates. So again, I have this intern who's like on the lookout for a good article. And I'm looking for not just like a good article, like the top shares of an article. Like this is what I would do if I was on the marketing side, is look at like what article, what content has the most shares. But what I'm looking for is what piece of content did the author put the most heart into, right? So I'm trying to engage them on an emotional level. And you can tell if like looking at like, let's just skimming through an RSS feed or skimming through like the latest post, which one's like a personal rant or like a personal thing just by the title, or like what's a typical article that they write. And you really just have to take the best guess because you don't know that person. You can't spend like 10 minutes doing that. But this whole process per person takes my team 30 seconds because all they have to do is like once I enrich the data and I find all the information, all they have to do is see if they have a blog. If they don't, skip it. And if they do, look at their latest 10 blog posts and see if one resonates.
Love it. I want to put this into context for the audience. So I'm not particularly getting sold at. I don't have salespeople chasing me all the time. But I do have people trying to sell themselves to get on the show. Both really poorly and some quite ingenious ways of doing it as well. And I see people, they obviously have listened. So if you want to get on the show, listen to a few episodes and tell me how you learned something from the show. That's in an email. That is typically the best way to get my attention. But I see people using the techniques that we talk about in the show to try and book a guest slot as a guest on the podcast. And it's intriguing to me that some will engage over social and then send me a Facebook message, which I don't reply to for 4 days because the Facebook interface is terrible and I hate going into it and getting down and dirty with all the messages that come in, versus the people who do the engagement, the Twitter, the comments on LinkedIn, the sharing the posts and tagging me in it so that I can see that they're at least try, even if they're not moving the needle, they're at least making somewhat of an effort. And then they email me, they get a reply pretty quick. Even better, and I don't know why more people don't do this, in that we've got a process in place, we've got a new producer on board, and on the website it says to email the producer. And very few people are doing that versus emailing me. And I think it's that we talk about getting past the gatekeeper. And so I think people are trying to get past the producer, come to me, get me on board, so then I sell the producer on having them come on, and the producer has the final say of a lot of this to take some of the burden away from me. And it's interesting the dynamics and all the different ways people are going about it versus 10 years ago, it probably would have just been an email to the producer like they were told. So where I'm going with this is, how do we know what is working? Because clearly, if we tweet them, if we go on LinkedIn, if we share an article, immediately we've got 3 or 4 data points. They might not reply to the first email. We do it again, then we've got 8 data points. And we're doing this over 50 accounts that we're trying to get into with 5 people in each account. And for a marketer, there's probably data software that can visualize this. But for a salesperson, it's too many numbers to keep track of. How do we, or I guess two questions here. How do we measure it? And what should we be measuring to see if the different things we're trying is having any success?
Yeah, so I'll answer your second question first. My North Star metric when cold email and any type of outreach is response rate. I don't care if it's a negative response, if they reject me. I just want to be acknowledged that I've penetrated, that they've devoted 10 seconds of their life to think about the value or whatever proposition I have. And then it's essentially at the end of the day, it's, you could get a high response rate, but everybody says no. Ultimately, the metric is, are you moving the needle? Is it driving sales? Are you getting what you want? And I try to keep very early on. I try to keep my initial question more like a super simple answer just to get the response. Because once I have them talking, it's just like once you get somebody on the phone, like you kind of have to finish the conversation unless you want to be rude and hang up on them. Now, if you want to be rude and hang up on them, that's going to happen too. But the increases the chances of success once you get somebody on the phone. So how do you track this stuff? I mean, ultimately, there's you should be using like software to track like your whatever software it is, to track your cold emails, whether it's things like if you're sending it through like Gmail, or you're using you can use Yesware, Mixmax, things like that. If you're sending out larger campaigns, any tool that's decent out there has tracking. Now, again, most people go and try to track click-through rates, open rates, all these things, but just focus on the one thing that matters, the response rate. And actually, I've found that if you do not actually have any of the other tracking, like the click-through rates, the opens, and any of that stuff, your actual deliverability goes up, because there is less traceable things that relate back to your email. So obviously, all the ESPs are looking for anything that's spam related.
What's an ESP, and what does deliverability mean? Bearing in mind that the audience are perhaps sending, as I said, 5 emails to one account as opposed to 1,000 emails, so they might not understand the quirks of sending mass mails.
Yeah, so an ESP is an email service provider. So that's like the person on the other end. So if you're sending it to a Google account or Gmail, that's Google. That's Google. But if you're sending it to a corporate account, it may be whatever mail provider they use, Microsoft, what have you, or Comcast if you're sending to a personal account. Whatever kind of person who polices or monitors or manages the email. All of those guys have software and people and things in place to prevent spam. And it's not like they're preventing it from guys like sending 5 emails. They're trying to prevent all the the Nigerian spam, the Nigerian, not Nigerian as a,
we know
but
the
Nigerian print scam. Yeah, exactly. That and that kind of stuff. They're trying to prevent that. And what happens is like, you want to be as far away from that as possible. And to be honest, if you're sent, all it takes is a couple people marking you as spam to get your spam rating up high enough to where you're then monitored. And then when you're monitored, your email is monitored, and there's enough of a trace of similarity, you're just kind of screwed. So you want to prevent that from the beginning. So a lot of people are using like link tracking or even open tracking. And again, all these software, every software and that does this provides these metrics. But I actually encourage people to go the caveman route of like turn all that stuff off and send it like an email that looks the most like you sent it from your personal account. And the only thing you need to monitor is the reply rate. And the reply rate is something that any of these kind of tools can track by default, because it's an actual reply. So it's not requiring any additional HTML on an email.
Mm-hmm.
So again,
Love it.
it got a little technical there, but
Because I wanted to dive in that level deeper because I'm sure that there's people that are sending emails to corporate accounts, typically in B2B sales, that they are perhaps using a swear word. Perhaps they are, because you can somewhat casually say, "Oh, that's really shit. I'll help you out." And if someone complains, "That's really shit. I'm going to help you out. I'm going to do X, Y, Z," and then that email might not get delivered to the end user because it has a swear word in it. Or I know, for me, in my first medical device sales role, that company got their email address at kind of hugecorporation.com, got their email address banned on the NHS servers across the whole of the country for a few hours one time because, again, I think someone sent an animated image or it was something ridiculous and it got marked as spam. And so the whole of this corporation, their account, got blocked from the NHS servers, which meant that there were probably thousands of emails that were going to all the surgeons and procurement teams and everyone else a day, some automated from marketing, some automated from fulfillment. A lot non-automated from sales professionals weren't getting through, and it caused right havoc because the NHS, the government organisation, they don't have to let your emails through if they think that there's a potential whiff of any problems, not even necessary viruses, malware, or anything like that, just crappy emails coming through or even patient data escaping or anything like that. It's all way more regulated than what I think we give it credit for. So with that aside, you said something really interesting, and that is you have someone go through a list of emails and decide, I think your word was, whether they are quality or not. What determines whether is this lead generation? Is this whether something's a quality lead? Or is there a separation between a quality lead and a quality email?
yeah. So I mean, this is to me, this is the last part before the handoff goes from lead gen and building that list to actually sending it. Right. It is very important that you scrub this list. So like again, the first and foremost thing is removing all the bounce, like the clearly emails that are broken. There's tons of tools like never bounce, bounceless. I mean, just Google email verify and you'll see tons of stuff. And then it's that human scrubbing of like, that person, I think we've emailed them before, right? Like, if a human goes through this multiple times and, AI and all that stuff is great, but like, I think there's no supplement to like a human being kind of using their emotional intelligence to actually look through this. Like, maybe we shouldn't email Bill Gates because we'll never get through it and that's just going to go to waste, right? Or like, there's going to be those types of companies and that you're going to find any lead gen type tool, even process is going to find things that are just obviously wrong or incorrect or just not applicable. That's the stuff you want to weed out. And I've always found 30 to 35% of the fat or the things you probably should avoid gets solved by human review and by doing a list scrub.
How much of this is going to change in the not too distant future? As it might not, I hate the term AI because a lot of the time it isn't artificial intelligence, but things like machine learning and things like that. How much of this load is going to be taken away from human? Or do you think that there's always real value in a person looking over things and because they're making somewhat of an emotional decision on a lot of these email addresses, in this context, do you think that there's always going to be value in a human overlooking these kind of processes?
There's definitely going to be a need for humans, I think, and reviewing this part. I think AI machine learning is going to get smarter and smarter to be able to have like algorithms or things that they detect that can automatically weed people out. Or, for example, if you have the social profiles and you look like an AI or machine learning can like say, okay, if the person has more than 1 million Twitter followers, maybe you should think twice before you send them your generic email. And it puts them on like a yellow, maybe red flag list or like, hey, human needs to review this. But ultimately, there's somebody on the other end that needs to be looking at this because by the time machine learning catches up to that, what I just referenced, a human is going to be leveled up to another notch, another review, another thing, because whether we like it or not, there's still a human on the other end making a decision. And so we're optimizing for the human view, not a bot, right? Maybe we're optimizing for the secretary or the executive assistant or producer or whatever to review it, but there's still a person right now. And I think there's always going to be somebody.
I agree with this in that I think until the point when a computer can make a better buying decision than a human can, and that might not be as far off as what we think, in that become a point, and we covered this on the podcast before, but there'll become a point where you plug your sales algorithm into the buying algorithm, it goes through all the data, goes through all the CRM software on both sides, it susses it all out, and it goes maybe deal or no deal. And again, for the complex B2B sales, I don't think everything will go this way, because I think there's emotional barriers to people spending money within an organization. So it might be the correct deal. You might have all the evidence that's the correct deal, and you still have to sell the person and get them over this emotional or this fear hump of, is it worth the hassle of integrating? Is it worth the hassle of the purchasing and all this stuff for the perceived kind of the happiness and benefit on the far end? I think that will always remain as far as we're concerned within our lifetime. But I do think there's going to become a point where perhaps you don't need to cold email people. You'll be able to just prod at and tell me if you agree with this or if you think I'm talking absolute nonsense. But I think there's some point, there'll be a point where you have a software solution, a SaaS software solution for accounting. I don't know. You'll be able to prod at that company's API and get data back saying, well, if you went with us, we'd be able to immediately solve all these problems. You'd immediately be 10 times more efficient. And web hosting might be a better example. You could prod, see what the response times are for the website, see how much bandwidth they're using, see if there's any kind of algorithms or compression that you can use on your side to reduce all that. And you can go, you don't have to go to them. It's just an automated email that'll go out to someone within the organization saying, we can do X, Y, Z, and here's the price. Do you think that is I'm obviously talking us out of a sales job here, but do you think that's a feasible thing that can happen in the not too distant future, or is that just too much and too complex?
So my short answer is no. I don't think that's something that's going to happen soon. Just my personal belief, and here's why I don't believe that's going to be the case anytime soon, is that have you ever purchased something or helped a friend or did something that was probably you chose the second or third best option because there was somebody on the other end that could benefit from it, because that benefit you want to use to your benefit, that favor you want to use to your benefit some point down the future. I don't think a person can make that decision. And what if that one benefit that you can get from that person can actually 10x your company, or can help you intro a deal that's 10 times a normal size deal because you went with the subpar software because you wanted to help that person out. I mean, those types of things happen all the time, and humans can make that decision. I don't know an algorithm. I mean, again, I'm not a developer or an engineer that can think through this stuff, but how do you make that decision? And is that the right decision? First of all, I don't know if that's the right decision, but two, how do you kind of go around that?
This is amazing.
Because then we're going, yeah. So that's my 2 cents.
So should we be focused on what you just described of being that point of leverage, being that point of benefit, or being the channel to make introductions, to introduce the CFO we're selling to our CFO, to kind of do those extra little bits that some people listening right now are going, oh, I can't be bothered doing all that. It's a good deal. They should just go with it. And some people who perhaps further progressed, who have, even some of the more old school salespeople who are listening, are going, that's how I've closed my biggest deals over the years, by that extra nuance, that extra layer on top of the pie, that extra just thing that separates me from a commoditized product, better pricing, slightly worse pricing. Is that something that we should all be focused on moving forward in sales?
It should be something that should always be in the back of someone's mind as something to leverage. In my career as a marketer, the two biggest things, like there's two things that like have really helped me move the needle and separated me from others, right? Whether they were bigger brands or whatnot, helped me win contracts. One is relationships. Ultimately, if somebody likes me more, my personality, or is introduced to me by somebody that they respect, I usually win the deal, right? Number two is education. And I think that's where marketing comes in. If you can help educate and make your customer, your prospects smarter, they will value you better. I mean, and higher, because imagine if you got this solution for your problem software or whatever you're trying to purchase or sell, but you also help that person get smarter in their job, or help them get a raise, help them move up. I mean, if I'm the decision maker and you're selling me a product that's going to be okay, you're claiming the product is going to be better for my company. Cool. Let's say I buy that. But then there's an equal product out there, but you're also helping me get a raise, or you're helping me look good, or you're going to help me do the implementation for the software or whatever. All of this stuff makes me look like a hero and helps me personally. I'm going to go with that deal versus the other one. Now, let's say your software is worse than the competitors, and you provide this education or you help me get a raise. I might actually swing to you because it personally benefits me now. So that's why I think education is really all marketing, right? What I mean by this is marketing people are writing content for the blog, email newsletters, all this stuff, and they probably have like a Rolodex of like the best stuff, the most engaging that like they could probably just give the salesperson on the other end on a silver platter. Number two is that relationship. The salesperson has all these relationships that they can give kind of marketing on a silver platter. Like, hey, don't email these guys. I'm already talking to them. Stuff like that, I think, is that bridge between marketing and sales.
I think you've made a clear definition here between there's what the features and benefits of the product, that is the corporate yes or no. So when you've got your corporate hat on as a buyer, it meets our needs. Well, I guess that's all it needs to do. It only needs to meet the needs. It doesn't need to particularly surpass them or blow people away or be incredible. It needs to solve a problem, reliably. That comes into it. But then when you put your selfish hat on, I don't know if that's the right word to describe it, but you put your personal hat on and you go, holy crap, this is going to get me that promotion. Then they're going to buy 10 times over versus if it was just the better software, slightly more efficient, slightly less time spent in a spreadsheet versus it's done it for you. So with that, when does all this start? Should we be trying to engineer this wow factor and this personal kind of prodding that I can make you more successful in your role, or I can reduce your stress, or whatever it is on that personal level? Does this start in that first email we send? Or is the first email purely just to grab attention and then that all comes afterwards?
I usually do it. If I can pull it off, I'll start it in the first email, right? And it's like what marketers are doing all the time. They're sending newsletters, right? What's the first email typically you get in a newsletter? An article, a content piece, right? Something of that nature. I mean, if you signed up for a product, you might get a welcome email, whatever. But just like a marketing newsletter, you typically don't get sold immediately. You get value. So same should go on the sales side. That's not always possible because, frankly, you might have to like introduce the value. You might have to introduce the education. They might not know they need this education. So instead of when you do follow-up emails, instead of saying, "Hey, I'm following up to see where you're at with this," I'm following up with this, and we all know those follow-up emails we've done many times
Yeah.
before. And you're like, "Man, what do I say besides I just wanted to follow up?" Or where are you at with this? And you really just want to give them a polite nudge to move them forward. That's where great content comes into play. And again, go to the marketing team and literally get that information, and they'll probably gladly give it to you, because what you're doing on the other end is you're helping the marketer get penetration to the right people. So you're actually doing marketing in that case by following up. So that's what I typically like to do. And another thing here, just to kind of to add to this, is that if you don't have content for this process, what the process I'm describing is not top of the funnel, it's actually consideration. Like it's like, I would say it's like from the marketing side, when you get a lead to when you get a sale and when you close that sale. Like, so from like consideration to sale to customer success, that's where you need to actually create content. And so if you don't have that content, get your marketing guys to actually create that content for you. And I'll give you a clear example because I'm talking hypothetical here. So I run, in addition to my SaaS businesses, I run a marketing agency called Web Profits, and we're a digital marketing agency like many others. When I talk I get the privilege of being the sales guy as well as the marketing guy, mainly because we've hired salespeople and they don't know the details, and it just kind of loses the deal. But anyways, moving forward, what I've learned is from all my hundreds of conversations with potential customers, they've asked lots of different questions. They've asked like, how are you different than other people's? They're looking for, they don't ask this, but they're looking for like, do these guys actually practice what they preach? Because like they're selling a lot. Like they better be doing this, because if they're not doing it, I don't trust them. And this is what they're thinking in the back of their head. Number three is um, you know, how like what's their approach? How do they think about marketing? And there's no way I can give this whole like 3 hour long spiel of what I do and how I do it and why we're better or different than other people and why it's best. So I've just created content. I've created a video on describing our whole marketing process for our agency, and it's very, very intricate, very, very detailed. So we're very transparent. I use it as top of the funnel marketing, but it's actually a video. How are we different? And the big thing for us is we're different because of our team structure and how we're organized, because we're organized like an in-house company. And so I've created an org chart, and I've created a blog post that discusses our org chart. And I don't even I send the first piece of content before I even have a call with somebody, so they know what to expect. And then during the call, I reference the article. So essentially, I'm getting ahead of the problem or the question. And so these pieces of content I've created much, much later by understanding the problem. But I'm sure the marketing team or whoever's writing is gladly willing to create this stuff if it helps solve friction points.
Amazing. So just so I've got context here to relay it to the audience, you have essentially a funnel, you have typical questions that come up for a digital agency. A clear one would be, why are you different to anyone else? So then you have a video which you send before that. You're almost preempting the objection for it comes up, sending a piece of content. It must be somewhat useful and entertaining for them, of course. And then that stops the question even coming up, so the sales process becomes even more seamless. Is that about right?
It actually doesn't stop the question from coming up. It actually forces the question being discussed. It forces the question being asked, and a conversation happens because they're thinking about this. No matter what, most of the time there's multiple options of agencies, or there's like, should I hire? We have another objection, like, should we hire somebody in-house? Should we hire another agency? Should we not do this at all? Or is this the wrong
Yeah.
time, right? Typically, there might be multiple companies, but typically that's the decision tree or the options that they have. So I just preemptively start that conversation.
So how do you create content? Sorry to interrupt, but how do you create content that forces the question? Because I think a lot of salespeople listening would be going down the lines that I was of, how can I stop having these awkward conversations because they're mentally taxing and I feel horrible until I get to the end of them. Then everything's good as long as the objection's been dealt with. So how does your content force them to have a conversation about it? Because clearly in some scenarios that could be better because it allows you to jump in and be dynamic with it after the fact as well.
In the email, I just frame it saying like, here's some helpful content that will give you context of how we run our company, how we do marketing, and what makes us different. And literally that's the email. And that's the sentence I use. And there's 3 links, right? It's all 3 pieces of content. And sometimes I will not link to all 3. And most of the time people don't watch it, but what they do is they watch it afterwards. And then at the end, I just say, hey, we could talk more about this on the call. And they're just like, what? This is kind of intriguing. Now, this won't work forever because everyone's going to start doing this, or already starting to do this more. But on the call, then I actually bring it up, saying like, look, you may not have asked this question, but we get asked this question all the time. Like, how are we different? And realistically, this is how we're different. Like, we kind of just start bragging a little bit. But if I just started saying that without any context, it just makes us look weird. There's no connection or tie-in. And you're right, like it is a hard conversation to have, but it's usually a hard conversation to have when you're not in front of it. When you're in front of it, it's like you're driving the conversation. It's all good. But at the end of the day, it's like you have to have those hard conversations, because it's like going to the gym, right? I feel horrible that 1 hour. But the next, after I'm done with the gym, I feel amazing, or the results of the gym, you feel amazing or great. So it's like that. Nobody wants to go to the gym, but you kind of have to.
And I guess that's a differentiator in yourself. If other people And there's obviously stereotypes that aren't, there must be something to them, but they aren't 100% true of the salesperson is this loud, brash, arrogant, somewhat of an idiot driving around in a flash car selling stuff. And then you have the marketer who's more quiet, reserved, perhaps introverted, hiding behind mass emails. And obviously there's something to them because the stereotype doesn't come out of nowhere. But you're probably differentiating yourselves as yourself being, the marketer slash salesperson in this scenario. And that I bet other people are trying to hide behind content to not answer these questions. And you driving that forward shows that you're confident in what you're doing. And there's probably more nuanced lessons to this for the audience as well. I know with the surgeons I dealt with medical devices, I went from the biggest company in the industry to the other biggest company in the industry. And so I could answer questions that the surgeons had about the competitors' products. And a lot of it was just nonsense. But I had the context to go back and forth, and clearly it was a biased conversation I was having because I wanted to sell them. And both products were fantastic, so you couldn't have really gone too far wrong either way. And I would never slag anyone off, but I would always frame our benefits versus their benefits and leave out where they were slightly better versus where we were slightly worse. And by approaching it like that versus the salesperson who's competing with me who doesn't know anything about our products, only knows their own, and so they can only talk in that one dimension. I think there's a lot of value there for the end user. And where I'm going back with all of this is a lot of this comes down to industry knowledge and vertical knowledge, right? Of you couldn't have set these emails, these conversations up before you'd done 20 of them. Is there a way to accelerate that process to gather more kind of like data knowledge quicker?
Yeah, it's really just asking questions up front, surveying your users, your existing customers. So let's say you come into a role where there's a company that has lots of customers. We'll ask them, like, what were their main objections? What companies were they considering? These are tough questions. Like, what made you go with us? And let's just say, like, you ask the question, what made you go with us versus a competitor? Well, every single response of your customers, hopefully every single positive response is a testimonial. You can actually use all that content in your emails too, or like when in your conversations, or like make that a PDF, right? So it's really just asking your existing customers and making it part of the process. So, it's like an NPS, Net Promoter Score survey. Typically, you're supposed to ask those, after somebody has used the product or service for some time. So at all of our SaaS products, we ask it 90 days in, or actually 91 days in, because the first 90 days people might have problems and they might actually cancel, but we don't want those guys' feedback. We want the people who have actually used the product and what they don't like about it or what they like about it. And all the responses that are positive are essentially testimonials for us. So you can see, like, actually on mailshake.com/testimonials, we have a page that are actually live testimonials. I'm not trying to brag here, but like, this is what I'm saying is you make it a part of the process. Like, I know 91 days after a customer becomes a customer, they have the question we're going to ask, and we're either going to get good feedback of things we should improve or great testimonials of why they like the product. And if it's a testimonial, hey, I'm using it as marketing collateral immediately, right? So putting this as a part of the process is very, very important. And that's why I think it makes sense you have to work with like the sales, the customer support, and other parts of the organization to kind of get this thing through. And kind of on that note, it's not about getting things through. It's about creating a level of like a communication or a channel between all these departments, so that you're proactive about it instead of reactive about it.
I've just come up with, and as you're saying this, it might exist, but I've never seen it before. You could totally have an email signature that has a quote, a comment, some kind of praise in it that dynamically changes, or if you wanted to get overly sophisticated with it, which you probably wouldn't have to, it would know that you're dealing with a CFO, so it would include a testimonial quote from another CFO or something like that. That could be, anyone who's listening who's in marketing, even yourself perhaps, that could be a really good lead generation tool, because it probably wouldn't be that difficult to put together of an image that just changes every time it's opened again. And you could use it obviously to track email open rates and that kind of thing. But I think that would be really useful because it's almost subtle. It's not, I'm in your face, we are the best company, I'm the best salesperson. It's just in the signature. you make it more visible by reducing the crap that most people have in their signatures and get rid of all that nonsense. And just a one or two liner, I think it's got, even if the person reading the email read it briefly, it's almost just trickling in at the back of the brain that there's social proof there from people who are like them. And I think there's could be potential value in that.
Definitely. I'm nodding and my head's about to like fall off from just nodding so much. Actually, this is exactly what one of the tactics I mentioned in a recent presentation is to use your signature for social proof. Your signature is kind of like if you go to a website, right? Like you see like above the fold, you usually see some sort of call to action. You see, some sort of like, hey, we're featured in, we have 10 million customers, whatever, like something that shows them maybe testimonials, whatever, right? That's the job. That part right there is what your signature should be doing, is to be bragging for you. Because if you were to say it in the content of the body of the email, that's bragging. That might be like overzealous, or maybe you might rub somebody the wrong way. But if your signature says it, even if it's not all the time, like you mentioned, you change it up, it's implied that it's always said and done. And there's actually two great tools that I use. One is called Sigstr, sigstr.com. I have no affiliation. The other one is called Wisestamp. Both are great tools to actually optimize your signature. So those testimonials or whatever you're going to throw in there, those are all things you can systematically program. So like if you're, let's say, a sales operation manager or you're in charge of a sales team, you can control what goes in people's signatures based off of statistical kind of relevance. So
amazing. I'll link to both of those in the show notes to this episode over at salesmanpodcast.com. And with that, Sujan, I've got one final question. So I'm going to ask everyone that comes on the show, and we'll wrap up with this. And that is, if you could go back in time, I appreciate you're a marketer that also has a sales hat, so you'll be able to answer this one. But if you could go back in time and speak to your younger self, what would be the one piece of advice you'd give him to help him become better at selling?
Yeah, I mean, the one thing I would say is start building relationships early. In my earlier days, I had mistaken, conversations, and like when somebody asked me a question, I answered it instead of really getting to the bottom of it and thinking about why they answered it or why I asked the question in the first place, and so I treated things a little bit more transactionally. My seasoned self I'm focused very much on building relationships, because I know those relationships. And a lot of times it's not relationships of people coming inbound. It's me helping other people and whatnot. But those are things that have helped me move mountains. And it's the help I've gotten when I haven't asked for it that I wish I have started doing that much, much earlier.
Amazing. I'm going through this a little bit at the moment, and I'm driving the audience crazy as we're talking about emails, when you join the Salesman or the Daily Salesman email newsletter, and I'll plug it for everyone. People must be sick of hearing about it by now, but it's got an article in it. It's got a sales comic in it. It's got a link to the latest podcast, some exclusive video clips, and other good stuff in there as well. It's almost like a daily sales magazine. But the first email, before you get any of the good stuff, asks you to reply to me with what's holding you back in sales at the moment. And I get, say, 50 of these kind of responses a day, and I go through them, and it might take a week or so to get through them, but I get through all of them. And a lot of the time, I'll give a really, thoughtful response. I'll dive in as deep as I possibly can with the context that the person's given me. And the email I get back is, oh, great, I didn't think that you were actually going to respond. I really appreciate that. But now they're in this loop with me, and I want to go as deep as far as possible to build a really deep relationship with them. So I then kind of force myself upon them to not accept that kind of, oh, thank you email. And I go deeper and deeper. And I've even brought in experts. There's one particular expert that I've brought in a couple of times now. He's a sales trainer from San Francisco, one of the best out there. And he's been he's won a ton of business now from some of the Silicon Valley startups from being involved in these emails, where I'm obviously making this relationship with the guest. I'm linking in the expert because there's potential for them to win business, but they've got to add a shitload of value first. And it's a really good conversation starter, if nothing else, just from seemingly a cold email that comes in. So I made that point just to encourage the audience that when you get these emails, when you go back and forth with potential customers, I think it's always worth trying to go that one layer deeper. If clearly it's better to do this on the phone, but if you can't get them on the phone, just to show that you actually care. And I think this is a differentiator between when you've got sometimes, and I've seen this because it happens to me, you have an SDR passing leads onto a BDR, or passing meetings onto a BDR. The SDR, rightly or wrongly, they're targeted on number of meetings. So they're spamming the crap out of the industry. Some emails come through great, some emails don't come through great. You can smell the ones that are fully automated a mile away. But because they are just excited to hand things off, they don't go any deeper, and so you've got no real relationship, and so you're missing a point of value with that company, I find. So yeah, I just wanted to fill that in because I think there's a lot of the audience, we kind of started with this at the top of the show, there's a lot of the audience who are just trying to get leads, just trying to get phone calls. And I feel like email is underutilized from just going that one step deeper, asking that one question that you would ask over the phone to build that bit more of a relationship. And with that rant over, Sujan, tell us where we can find out a little bit more about you. Tell us a little bit about Mailshake as well, because I know even though this is a sales podcast, there's a whole bunch of marketers and sales ops and other people who'd be interested in that as well.
Yeah, so you can find me. Best place is my website, sujanpatel.com. My goal is to share everything I know. And Mailshake, you go to mailshake.com, but Mailshake's aim is to be the simplest cold email tool possible. There's a lot of different tools out there, and they all are great, but I find they're very hard and confusing, and you can get lost in the flow. So we've just built something super simple, and so yeah, check it out.
Good stuff. I'll link to both of them in the show notes to this episode at salesmanpodcast.com. And with that, Sujan, I want to thank you for your time, your insights. It's always good to get marketer's perspective, finance director's perspective, a buyer's perspective on a lot of this, because I think salespeople live in their own bubble, and I think there's a lot of nonsense in that bubble. So I appreciate you coming in and helping us out here. And with that, I want to thank you for joining us on the Salesman Podcast.
Thank you. It's been fun.